Hello there, and thanks for checking in. I'm Dr. Neptune, and today's video is going to be about part of my media collection that's print, books mainly, and a couple of other related things. So I've shown some of these things in other videos, and if I go past them really quickly in this video here, you can probably find more detail in those other ones about the artist or the genre. But I want to start with this one, which is No One Here Gets Out Alive. In some way, this is where my collection of rock books started. This was published in 1980, when I was 13 years old, the perfect time for me. And I got this book in paperback. This is not the original copy. That disappeared somewhere, was given to someone or borrowed by someone or stolen, I don't know, but I'm not mad about it. I read it probably 3 or 4 times in my middle school and high school years. And this is the copy that I just purchased from Amazon and reread for the first time in probably 40 years this past week. And I can see why this book was so key to my understanding of rock and my enjoyment of it. First of all, I already knew the Doors. Thought they were very cool. I liked their songs. I heard them on the radio all the time, FM radio, in those days. And this book connected that to some of my other interests, which were literary. I was already a pretty big reader at this time and read a lot of classic literature. And this book described Jim Morrison's interest in those sorts of things too, and also connected his work and his lyrics to poets such as Rimbaud, is my first understanding of him, and to Nietzsche. That was the first time, I think, in this book that I heard anything about Friedrich Nietzsche, specifically his idea of the Apollo and Dionysus duality as it applies to art. All that sounds pretty highfalutin and pretentious maybe, but for me, it connected 2 worlds that I didn't fully really understand before, that a rock musician, a rock band, a pop artist could also have deep roots in an artistic and literary tradition. So this is a great read. It's kind of the template, I think, for almost everything else. This reissue, this reprint, has the exact same cover. It's an iconic cover even, and was an enjoyable read this time around too. All right, so that, as I say, is probably the first rock book that I ever got, and had a pretty big effect on me. Now, the next few things I'll show are illustrations of other books that help me to kind of figure out what this music was all about. So this is the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll. This is actually the 3rd edition, published in the early 2000s, I believe. I had the first edition, which I foolishly discarded. I threw out. When I got this, I figured the old one was out of date. This is a hugely expanded edition of this book, but just for nostalgia's sake, I kind of wish I still had that old thinner edition from the early 80s. My sister Linda gave me that one for a present. And I probably read every entry in it. So pre-internet, this was a great resource to find out about all kinds of artists that you see. They included country and pop and other types of artists through here. They had important dates in their career. One thing that I really was interested in was the album titles and years of release. And so entries on all of these different artists. And this was a much consulted reference for me, both in its 1st and 3rd editions. And then I supplemented that, got this sometime in the 80s, mid 80s, a Trouser Press that was kind of an alternative magazine, I think, guide to new wave records that filled in some of the blanks that weren't in the more mainstream Rolling Stone Encyclopedia. Although the third edition that I just showed did include a lot of new wave type artists that the first one hadn't. Right, and so this is very similar in its setup here, and I learned a lot about a lot of artists from thumbing through this. And then there's this, The Rock of Ages, the Rolling Stone History of Rock and Roll. This is a kind of a doorstop book. It came out, check the date, 1986. Right, so everything up to that date. Chapters, I think I just saw the names here. Thought they had names of artists in the chapters, but anyway, a chronological history of rock and roll. It really helped me understand the whole evolution and context and the early artists. Some of these artists I already knew, others I didn't so much. Going right back to, I guess, the 40s and 50s. So this was a good book to have on the shelf. And speaking of Rolling Stone, that really was again, pre-internet, the best way to find out about music. So here's an example of a print copy. This is from 1999. I think the first copy of Rolling Stone that I ever bought was probably more than 20 years earlier, and it had Blondie on the cover, Debbie Harry and Blondie. And Rolling Stone came out, I think, every 2 weeks all through those years, and had good reviews, good features. I always thought it was a little too political, even when I was a kid, maybe even more so now. But as far as a mainstream publication about rock and pop music, Rolling Stone was really your go-to print source. This was a large format here that I'm holding, and then they cut down in size. So here's a Nicki Minaj cover from 2015. You can see it's much smaller. I don't know about the future of the magazine publishing industry. I don't know if there will be physical magazines in the future, especially after COVID and whatnot. Of course, all these publications have websites, but I'm interested to know if there will really be such a thing as print magazines in the near future. The only real competitor to Rolling Stone was Spin. So Spin was a magazine started up by the son of the publisher of Penthouse. And this is a large format magazine. Tended to go a little less mainstream, more alternative, for whatever meaning that term still holds. So here's a cover of Tori Amos from November 99. And then here is a Fiona Apple cover from February 2000, just a few months after. So just by sheer coincidence, I got Spin at the moment in time when they changed from large to more traditional magazine-sized format as well. With Spin, I don't even know if they have a website. I probably should have checked before I started talking, but they were often an interesting alternative to the more mainstream media that Rolling Stone represented. And Rolling Stone does publish pretty good commemorative editions. I have a handful of them here. You'll see these on the newsstand or at the grocery store. And if you still like to have something on your shelf, instead of searching online for information, these are nice things to have. So I've got the Beatles. This I think is the oldest one that I have from 2010. And there is Dylan. I have 2 Dylans. Here's the complete album guide, 100 greatest songs. Here's David Bowie. Always have really good pictures too. Sometimes reprints from Rolling Stone of different eras, and sometimes new things. Here's Keith Richards, Nirvana, and Madonna. So whenever I see someone on the cover of one of these things that I'm interested in and would like to have some kind of tangible thing, I'll get one of these. Okay, this stack of books I think I've shown in other videos, and these are more kind of general interest books about genres or time periods or similar sort of things. So here's Greil Marcus's Old Weird America, about the recording of the Basement Tapes with Bob Dylan and the band. It's a great book about glam rock, Shock and Awe by Simon Reynolds, an English writer. This is a book about the New York rock scene in the late 70s. Love Goes to Buildings on Fire. It's a reference to a Talking Heads song. Here's another book by Simon Reynolds, Rip It Up and Start Again, Post-Punk, 78 to 84. Mad World is about new wave artists in the 80s, an oral history. Duran there, Adam Ant, I believe. Looks like Morrissey. I Want My MTV, history of MTV, which was so important. So before MTV came along was when, like I said, you had to go to the newsstand and get your news from Rolling Stone or maybe updates on the radio, and then MTV came along, changed everything. Still, you had to wait until an interview came up or your artist appeared, but the artists seemed much more accessible then. And then, of course, now with the internet, they are much more so. But that was a huge step forward in being a fan and loving music for me and for people of my generation and others. So I Want My MTV, a history of that. And then here's Facing the Other Way, the story of 4AD. That's an English independent record label, home of Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance, This Mortal Coil, and others. Probably had their peak popularity in the 80s. Right, so there were a lot of artists on 4AD that I really admired. This was an interesting history of them. And this stack of books is by a single writer, Chuck Klosterman. He writes a lot about rock music, a lot of cultural criticism akin to it, and on sports and some other topics as well. He's actually one of my favorite writers, as you can see from the stack. I went to see him one time at a book festival here in Las Vegas, Neptune. And he was quite engaging and funny, as he is in all these books. So I think I arranged these chronologically from his earliest work. So here's Fargo, Rock City, autobiographical, I think. Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs, a collection of essays. Killing Yourself to Live. Some of these are full-length discussions. Others are a collection of essays. So Chuck Klosterman 4, which I have to think is a reference to Led Zeppelin 4, is a collection of essays. He wrote a lot of articles for magazines and then online sources too, which I think these two are also collections of. And then more recently, I think I'd say in the last 10 or 15 years, he's moved into more fiction. So these are both novels that are quite good. And his latest work continues a series of short stories grounded in the reality that these other works are too. So lots of pop culture references, and he's very funny. I believe he may be the exact same age as I am, so we really have a lot of intersections in terms of our interests, with the one exception that he's a huge Kiss fan, which I never was, but I always enjoy reading his stuff, so he's worth checking out in any form. Chuck Klosterman. And then to round out this part of my collection, which is about historical and critical essays and whatnot. This is kind of a curiosity book that I got called the Rock Snob's Dictionary. It's all meant to be tongue-in-cheek, to poke holes in the pretensions that sometimes occur in rock criticism. And my favorite entry of all time, I always remembered this, is the word plangent, which is a standby rock crit adjective used to lend a magical aura. I'm mumbling this. You can read it better than I can. Anyway, that is a term that you'll hear a lot of, or you used to maybe before this came out and shamed everyone. And it's just a lot of funny stuff in there. And then here's a collection of essays by Rob Sheffield, who I believe still writes for Rolling Stone. I've seen a lot of his work when I check into Rolling Stone online. So kind of a memoir with music as the basis. Again, I think this guy is probably close to my age, so there's a lot here that I can identify with. And to close out the essay portion of my collection, here's a surprise entry. This is American Psycho, the novel by Bret Easton Ellis about the serial killer. This came out in 1991, and it's a very difficult read. If you are squeamish at all, don't read this because the murder scenes are quite graphic. However, at the time this came out, I was really struck by the fact that this book is written in the first person by Bateman, the psycho killer. And he's got a few chapters here where he engages in some rock criticism. Here's a chapter on Genesis. He's got other chapters on Whitney Houston and Huey Lewis and the News. And although some of the points that he makes in these essays are, I think, clearly meant to be tongue-in-cheek and to show the shallowness of the character, there's also some pretty good criticism in here that I've really never forgotten. In here, for example, he talks about Peter Gabriel, who left the group to start a lame solo career. So some of the observations are sort of superficial and funny, but at the same time, they make a lot of sense. For example, here, he praises the song Illegal Alien, which is completely out of bounds and would never be released in these days. And then here, Invisible Touch is the group's undisputed masterpiece. So in part, I think Bret Easton Ellis, the author, may be parodying rock criticism here, but at the same time, there's a depth to these essays that has always stuck with me. And I've considered Bateman, the fictional character, to be an interesting essayist on 80s pop music. And then in addition to the music, of course, I've always been interested in other aspects of music and albums and CDs, such as design, fashion, even typography. It's been something I've noticed from early in my collecting days. So these 3 books are kind of art books about 2 different labels that were distinctive for their visuals. Mute Records, both Mute and Factory, independent English record labels. And so Mute, best known as home of Depeche Mode probably, and then Factory, home of New Order, among many others. So these are nice large format illustrative books about the aesthetics of those record labels. And someone who was always especially good at blending music and fashion and design and whatnot is Madonna still. This is one of her most transgressive projects along those lines. Her book Sex, which came out in, I believe, 1993 or 2. Here, came sealed in this bag for your protection. and more details can be seen in the Madonna video. And then her spiritual heir, I think, is Lady Gaga. And here's a book of her taken by the fashion photographer Terry Richardson, who got caught up in some issues regarding the Me Too movement, his mistreatment of people he worked with. I'm not exactly sure what came of all that, if he's still working or what, but at this time he collaborated with Lady Gaga, and this is, I believe, a year in her life type thing. So not quite as sexually transgressive as the Madonna book, but certainly in keeping with the spirit, I think. All right. And then I have some actual models here. Naomi Campbell. She recorded an album in the mid-90s. I think it was 1994. And this is the cover, called Baby Woman. These photos are by Ellen von Unworth. These ones here, this book is a collection of her work with all different fashion photographers through the years. But this was the album cover, her shaving her legs, sitting on the toilet. And these are, I think, outtakes from the same session. Clearly she was looking to de-glamorize herself a little bit. And this is an album that is surprisingly good. Yes, I listened to the entire thing as research for this video. You're welcome. But it was not a chore. She has a nice husky type voice. The music on it is very much in keeping with the best music of the day. She works with some of the big producers of the day, like PM Dawn on one track. And this is, that's an album that I would listen to more than once, which I can't really say about the Paris Hilton album, simply titled Paris. This is her book, Confessions of an Heiress, came out about 5 years, I think, before her album. Actually, maybe not that long, but anyway, her album is called Paris, and I would describe her singing voice as a combination of Gwen Stefani and Marilyn Monroe. Not unpleasant. Her single is a kind of a light reggae song, and she does an interesting cover of Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy? But of the two model types here, I would recommend Naomi's album over Paris's on its merits. And as far as I know, Kate Moss has never recorded any music with her singing, but I'm including this monster-size coffee table book of her work as a model, of course, with all different photographers, because she does have a tangential link to the music world. She appeared in the video for the White Stripes cover of the Burt Bacharach song, I Just Don't Know What to Do With Myself, pole dancing in a bikini. And so here is her work from many different eras and with many different photographers. And this is the biggest and most expensive model fashion photography book that I have, because Kate Moss is my favorite from that era. And the most recent additions to my collection of kind of fashion and photography and design books as they relate to music come from the K-pop world. So here's a Blackpink photo book. All of these were issued without CDs or anything. Every CD comes with its own photo book, but these were independent. So they're essentially just continuing like the Kate Moss or the Naomi Campbell book. Really little to zero text at all. Just fashion shoots, in this case of the members of Blackpink. And then here is one for Red Velvet and their concert called La Rouge, held in November of 2019. Some text in Korean, it's brief interviews, but kind of a souvenir photo book of the weekend event. And then Twice, the 9-member group, has been pretty prolific in terms of issuing books and photo books. Here's Feel Special, is the name of one of their album releases. And it's a monograph. It's a fancy name for a book. Here are the names of the 9 members. And all this is really is pictures from the video shoot and the stage performances, just to commemorate that part of their career. They have these monographs for other releases as well. But I just have this one, Feel Special, I think was released in 2019, I'm gonna say. And then here is a Twice zine. Quite frankly, I bought this without knowing what it was. It turns out that it's a bunch of pictures of the members of Twice in camping gear and a lot of text, but all in Korean. So really have no idea what they're saying in response to any of these questions. And this does come with a CD, I think. I thought I saw one in there, but maybe not actually. So sometimes I buy things without knowing what they are. And then this is interesting. Here's 2 members of the 9 from Twice that have their own photo book. I don't know if there's a plan to have one of these for each of the 9 members, but so far there's Mina and Chewy, pronunciation of her name. And these are just really high quality, fancy photo books of these members in various different modeling shoots. No text at all, again. So just the emphasis on the image, of course, on her face, her clothes, her surroundings, but really beautiful, beautifully made, beautifully bound, kind of luxury coffee table items here. So far, one from Mina, one from Chewy. All right, now going backwards in pop history, here's my Elvis collection. The Elvis Reader is a series of essays, as it says right here, articles, reviews, blah, blah, blah. It's an interesting collection here. Then here's the 2-volume biography of Elvis by Peter Guralnick. Excellent, very well researched. Includes critical appraisals of his work. Really kind of essential reading, I would think, for anyone who really wants to know about Elvis. So first volume is Last Train to Memphis, and the second one is Careless Love. Here's Greil Marcus again, Dead Elvis, meditation on Elvis's cultural meaning, I guess, post-death, as a chronicle of a cultural obsession. This is a great picture book, just called Elvis. And then this is the Elvis auction catalog, an auction of his things that were held here in Las Vegas some years ago. Next, there's a few books on the Rolling Stones. Exile in Main Street, A Season in Hell with the Rolling Stones, about the recording of that great double album from the early 70s, mostly in the south of France, and lots of debauchery and crazy stories came from that time. And then Keith Richards' awesome memoir called Life, and then a nice coffee table book, According to the Rolling Stones, filled with pictures and interviews and history all the way through. A lot of books on punk here. Both of John Lydon, aka Johnny Rotten's memoirs. This is his first one from the 90s, Rotten, and then some 15 or so years later, Anger Isn't Energy, another one. 12 Days on the Road, a book about the Sex Pistols' disastrous last tour of the United States in 1978, I believe. Viv Albertine was a member of the Slits, one of the best punk bands, and an all-female band. So a great book of hers, a memoir called Close, 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 Music, Boys, Boys, Boys. This is the title. Here's a brief biography of Sid Vicious, another Greil Marcus book, Lipstick Traces. It seeks to locate the punk movement in a longer history of anarchist and Dadaist avant-garde artistic movements dating from the early 20th century. Very interesting cultural discussion here. And then this is a great, huge format book on punk, the definitive record of a revolution. Lots of great pictures here and text and interviews from people on the scene all the way along. Here's my New Order and Joy Division collection. This was the first of these books that I got in the early 80s. Almost like a fan-generated book, this, but a lot of good information about a band who was kind of mysterious in those days, those pre-internet days. And then here we have Peter Hook, the founding bass player of Joy Division and New Order. His book about Joy Division is called Unknown Pleasures, and book about New Order is Substance. And here's Bernard Sumner, the guitar player and singer of New Order, with his memoir, Chapter and Verse. And most of the rest of the books that I have here are either memoirs or biographies. I prefer a memoir. I'd like to hear the artist tell their own story in most cases. But of course, there are a lot of great biographies, like the one I started off with, the Jim Morrison one. But here's Bob Dylan's Chronicles, Volume 1. I really hope Volume 2 comes out soon. This is amazing. It's great. It's Bob Dylan. He won the Nobel Prize. He might not talk about the eras in his career that you are most interested in, but it doesn't matter because the ones that he does talk about are very interesting. So there's Bob Dylan. Here's Boy George's Take It Like a Man. This was a really interesting book to me. I didn't know that he had his roots so deeply in the punk era of London, and it describes some pretty harrowing experiences squatting in flats with his friends and whatnot. Goes through his drug use and all the ups and downs, and a nice detailed description from the inside of Culture Club, one of my favorite 80s groups. Here's Springsteen's Born to Run, his memoir. He writes in exactly the same voice that he writes his songs, so it's instantly recognizable. And this is actually, that is Bruce as a young man. So very detailed. This was in some ways an accompaniment to his Broadway show, I think, which then was recorded, and I watched it on Netflix. So I think this came out maybe 5 years ago or so. Of course, he's in his 70s now, I believe, and he's doing a lot of looking back. Still producing new work, though. So there's Springsteen. Here's a book about Brian Ferry and Roxy Music, like the New Order book I showed earlier. Pre-internet, this was the best source I had for understanding this great group and their music and their different album releases. And then here's a biography of Dean Martin. It wasn't until I started investigating Elvis that I understood the importance of Dean Martin. Elvis loved Dean Martin. And once you understand that, you can hear Elvis's appreciation of Dino's style in a lot of his ballads, the way he sings. This is a great book about Dean Martin, very well researched, very detailed. And Dean was just a cultural icon for many decades. And then also Frank Sinatra, someone that I didn't really have an appreciation of as a high schooler or a college student. This was someone who I needed to mature a little bit to really appreciate. So this is just kind of an appreciation of him. What was so cool about him is one of the books that helped me understand that he was as much of a rock star as Jim Morrison or any of the others that I admired. Beastie Boys book, published after the death of MCA here. A fun book. Beastie Boys are a fun group. Very thick, lots of pictures, lots of stories all the way through here. I saw the Beastie Boys on their very first tour, Licensed to Ill. I believe it was 1986, and their opening act was Public Enemy. And so Beastie's always a favorite. Beastie Boys book. Here's two related to Bjork. This is a series of photography, artwork, essays, some by her, some text by others. In some ways, a compilation of her work with photographers through the years. So there's Bjork as a visual artist, and then this is the great Museum of Modern Art catalog to the Bjork exhibit, the mid-career retrospective. Really brilliant, beautiful packaging, a great exhibition. I wish I could have seen it. But if you'd like to see more of this, check out my Bjork video. All right, here's Johnny Cash's autobiography, published around the same time as his mid-90s late career comeback, his brilliant string of records with Rick Rubin. And I believe this was the basis for the movie that Joaquin Phoenix was in, where he portrayed Johnny Cash. Great story by a great legend of music. This is a bizarre book. It's called 2023, a trilogy by the Justified Ancients of Mumu, aka the KLF. They had a few big hits in the 90s, and then they have a very weird history and mythology that they created, and this book is all part of it. It's not really about the music or the group at all. It's about some kind of weird conspiracy theory, numerology. I don't understand it. I don't think it's meant to be understood, but it's all in the spirit of their weirdness. The Justified Ancients of Mumu. All right, so one of the oddest books that I have in my music collection. Here's Kim Gordon's memoir, Girl in a Band. Of course, the founding member of Sonic Youth, and left the band when her marriage to another founding member, Thurston Moore, had fallen apart, and has continued on her own solo career with some great results. I follow her Instagram. Here's Morrissey's autobiography, singer of the Smiths and solo artist for many years. Very prickly character, if you know anything about Morrissey. Seems like a difficult person to get along with, but has made great music over the years. So there's his autobiography. And then here, this is a book by Morrissey, I think before he even was in the Smiths, maybe. I don't know any of the circumstances behind this book, the writing of it, other than that it is actually by Morrissey. And Here's a publication from Manchester, where they're from, 1983. It's kind of obsessive fans description of James Dean. Never really heard anything about it, but I saw it at the same store where I got the New Order and the Roxy Music books that I showed earlier. It was Home of the Hits on Elmwood Avenue in Buffalo. And this is another very odd part of my collection, but I will never let it go because Morrissey's great, and so is James Dean. In fact, I have to give Morrissey credit probably for my first discovery of James Dean. As a young person, I was not really interested in old movies, but this book, I think, really helped me to get a sense of what these long dead actors could do. So I do trace some importance to this book beyond its weirdness as a cultural artifact. All right, and here's Pete Townshend's great memoir, Who I Am. He was one of the first rock stars that I really admired. Loved his writing and his songs and his singing from my earliest memories. I knew Pete Townshend and his work. And this is a late career kind of looking back on all of that in his own inimitable voice and sense of humor. Here's Phil Collins, possibly my favorite title of any memoir, Not Dead Yet. A lot in here that I didn't know. I bought this at an airport, I think, and it's about some of the serious health issues that he had. Actually prevented him from playing the drums for a while. Describes the inspiration for some of his most known songs. The way he tells it, he had a very terrible breakup of his marriage in the early 80s. A lot of Genesis and Phil Collins songs came from that pain in one way or another. But then there's other funny stories, and Phil Collins is a good storyteller as well. Here's a great book by Thomas Dolby. She Blinded Me with Science, that guy, who is an engineer, a sound engineer, and has a patent on something to do with MP3s, I believe. This is a book in part about his musical interests and in part about his technological and interest in his contribution to the music technology. So this was a really interesting take on all that by the author himself, by Thomas Dolby. And then here I've got Tori Amos, which a portrait of herself in collaboration with this journalist, Ann Powers. And an extension of the themes that are present in pretty much all the songs from her whole career. And now to conclude this discussion, I'm going to show books in non-book media form. And I only have 3. One is what up until recently had been the only audiobook that I'd ever purchased and listened to, which is this. John Taylor, the bass player from Duran Duran, reading his own memoir called In the Pleasure Groove. So this was an iTunes purchase.
Chapter 2. Jack, Jean, and Nigel. Church just was. Like electricity, heat, or black and white TV. Something that...
Okay, so there he's talking about his early childhood. But this was a really fun listen in a car trip to California one time. And then up until just this past year, I didn't get any other audiobooks or any other electronic books until I got this Kindle. Now, what I'm showing you here is on my Kindle. It's a novel by Jessica Jung called Shine. You see it there. It says All's Fair in Love and K-pop. Jessica Jung was a founding member of Girls' Generation, which is one of the most successful and beloved K-pop groups. And her leaving was actually a sort of a controversial event in Korea. It's referenced in the movie that won the Academy Award, which name I can never remember the name of, but it's the movie directed by the Korean guy, and it won last year. And I'm just looking here for about the author page. Okay, there we go. So here's Jessica as of last year. And this is an interesting book. It's fiction, and it's actually marketed as young adult fiction. But it does seem to come from some true life experiences. And it was a cool look at the process of the trainees in K-pop and the pressures that are on them, both within and without the organization, and the competition with the other trainees. So that was an interesting read. It's called Shine, and then her Instagram says that she's got a sequel in the works. And then finally, what I have is a book by Lana Del Rey of her poetry, published last year, called Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass. After the John Taylor audiobook, Lana Del Rey's was the second that I ever purchased. I got it from Amazon. And so I listened to these poems read in her voice on that. And then at some point, the actual book came out. Most of these pictures, many of them anyways, I think are taken by Lana. You've got her own script there, typed and handwritten. Some pictures not by her, but all evoking this world of Southern California. And then I have this, which is a picture disc, also of the poems being read by the author, Lana Del Rey. So this one I have in 3 different formats. I have in this vinyl picture disc, I have in this book format, and I have in electronic audiobook format, which I think is a good way to end this discussion of technology in my media collection that is centuries or even millennia old. The first paper appeared in Egypt, it seems, a couple thousand years ago. First books as we know them, bound paper into a codex, is from about the 3rd or 4th century. First magazines as we now know them, 16th, 17th century. And then vinyl albums and whatnot, 20th century, MP3s and so forth, 21st century. So my collection spans eons and genres, and hope that you enjoyed this look at this part of it. Thank you for that, and I will be back soon.